initiate chaos theory guarantees that we'll play like lightning shots, sounding like thunder. For every time in the face that it hits us, we're faster. Well, they should know by now. They see the world keeps trying to shake us. It only wakes us. The pendulum swings. The pendulum swings. It's in a beautiful darkness. Only another. It's full steam ahead. Full steam ahead. All above the Petty Express. Misdirected from the start. It's a runaway train. I come a freight train. I come a freight train. In a beautiful darkness, the Petty Express. In a beautiful darkness.
Hi, you guys. Welcome to week one of the Uvalde trial, kind of a wrap up. There were a lot of things that went on this week, and we are going to only watch two clips because I think they are important, because I think there are fundamental differences in the way the defense sees the case and the way the state sees the case. And I think they're very clearly illustrated by their opening statements. But I'll kind of let people come in, but I had to take a little bit of a break yesterday. I had to unplug absolutely completely because Mr. Mo came out or down to hang out yesterday, Saturday, because I was like, oh my gosh, I feel like I haven't seen you because Friday was just a marathon. And I was trying to explain the last day of the trial and I was tearing up and he's like, why don't you just take a break today? Because I was like, I want to do a wrap up. I want to, give people an idea of what's going on. And he's like, I think you need to take a little break. So I did. And thank you to whomever got my conductor hat because it is awesome. Now, you may or may not notice, I also worked on my hair. I did not like the dark as much as I thought, so I used a gentle color remover and then went with a more vibrant red. Not that that means anything to anyone, but I feel more like myself, my regular natural hair color. But before we even get into the opening statements, there was some activity prior to the jury even coming in for opening statement that I think will really clearly kind of show you where the state's coming at this case and where the defense is coming at this case. Most of the before we even got into the opening statements, there was a lot of talk about the state's desire to use very graphic crime scene and autopsy photos. Now, this had been something that both sides had been addressing in limine prior to the trial starting. And the defense's argument was, and this is where I think we are fundamentally seeing lawyers argue two different cases. The way the state has read the charges against Adrian Gonzalez. Now, I think we need to go back a little bit. This case is basically about school resource officer Adrian Gonzalez. He was the first officer affiliated with the Uvalde School District to get on scene at Robb Elementary. Now, he and the shooter kind of actually reached the periphery of Robb Elementary about the same time. At least that's what the defense says. But basically, the way the defense sees this case is that Adrian is being charged for his inaction from the moment he stepped foot on the school to the moment that the assailant, the monster that actually did the shooting, got into classrooms 111 and 112, where unfortunately most of the carnage in this absolutely tragic case happened. Now, the way the state sees the case is that Adrian Gonzalez is basically tacitly responsible for every single death the moment that he didn't stop the assailant. So it's a very fundamentally different way that both sides are seeing the case, because the state is going across this case like they're charging the unaliver, the shooter, whereas the defense is saying, no, you cannot bring in these injuries, the things that this shooter did after he was already in. You cannot do that. So it really does help you to see how different and divergent these attorneys, both sides, are doing, to understand that they fundamentally see the case very differently. And it was about this time that I was starting to wonder, because I did not keep up with this case. This case bothered the ever living snot out of me. I was so angry, like every person with a soul and, a heart, to see those officers just hanging out in the hallway. Now, come to find out that Adrian Gonzalez wasn't even one of those people in the hallway. He was actually evacuating children. He was helping evacuate children. Now, the state could have very, very easily tailored this case to simply, very deeply and fully interrogate not only the policies in place that maybe Adrian Gonzalez didn't follow policy. Maybe there was a policy to run directly to the school to protect it. You could make that point. Maybe there was a policy that, the school should have had doors locked. The problem is that the state has not made the case that they need to, that Adrian Gonzalez, that this officer is uniquely responsible. Now, basically, I do like this judge, but I think he whiffles a little bit with allowing the state to use repetitive and cumulative emotional testimony. And I do think that the state needs to tread very, very carefully, because I think that if there are any parents on the jury, and we'll get to it at the end. This is more of a caboose thing. But I feel like you can only exploit something cynically for so long. And the fact that you had on the same day the state attorney forgetting 2 of the children's autopsies, like, oh, we have 2 more. And then the state proceeded directly after that emotional testimony to bring up a mother who will question for the rest of her life why she didn't take her daughter home. A lot of moms, a lot of parents, a lot of people are going to have a real hard gosh darn time dealing with you, again, parading a mother's self-imposed guilt. No one could have known what happened. And no one could have known that apparently no one can find their ass with their own hand in Uvalde. But there's a point at which this becomes very, very cynical, because they haven't put in the effort that is required to show that you are, really caring about these children. I've said it before and I'll say it again. Every trial is full of inherent human misery, but we have seen good examples of these big cases, these large and heartbreaking mass casualty incidents handled respectfully and in a way that isn't traumatic. I go back to the Darrell Brooks case. I mean, I'll raise my hand that I was completely unaware as to the gravity. I mean, I assumed that person versus truck was going to be incredibly detrimental, but it wasn't until we did victim impact statements that I was aware of the actual carnage, because the state didn't need to use it because they had a case. The problem underlying all of this is that the monster is dead, and you're left with dumbasses and cowards. And what does the state hope to achieve here? I don't know. But basically, this is all before opening statement. And it was at this point that my spidey sense, my Modi sense kind of went off, because I was like, oh shit, are they going to be just doing the trial that they had or that they would have been doing for the unaliver? Are we going to go for, full on, oh God, what is his name? The trial that I started watching when all of my injury happened. Rittenhouse. Are we going to go full, Binger, like, this man killed innocent people? Adjudicatedly not. Now, here, I am not here to police your opinion about that case, nor am I going to relitigate it. So, whatever you feel about Rittenhouse. So, yeah, we were able to know the details. And again, I want you to understand that I'm not a juror, but I have 87 pages of notes. Now, granted, that's only 43, like front and back. But for this week, and they don't get to take notes on opening statement. But basically, there is a lot of information to intake on this case. If I were the state attorneys, I would realize that this is going to be an overwhelming case. The way that they are presenting information, the way that they are going through things, it is incredibly dense. It is incredibly hard to focus. And I don't know what the jury is getting from their testimony. Now, that being said, I was willing, you guys, there was no one more pissed off than me. I remember all of the moms, because, stay at home mom here, we kind of had like a little mom group. And I remember each and every mom looking at each other and saying, we will go get our children. I mean, when Uvalde happened, you had parents, you had moms. Okay, I have a big van, allegedly in Minecraft. I have a Ford Transit. It came into the consciousness of parents that, and I know more than most because I watch trials, that there is no, obligation for the police to do anything to protect you. So it was now a thought in every parent's psyche, whether they admitted it or not, that they could be held back as their children were screaming, calling for help while doofuses in uniform got hand sanitizer. But I failed to see how this officer was, uniquely responsible. But I was willing to give the state a chance. I was. So we'll listen to a little bit. But as soon as I listened to this, I realized we are not dealing with a prosecutor. We are dealing with a proselytizer. I want you to listen to the cadence of the prosecutor's voice, because I look, my town has like more churches than they do corners. So we have all flavors of Baptist, Pentecostal, revival, Baptist, non-denominational Christian, which seems more conservative. But this is exactly how a preacher talks. Changed my mind.
Thank you. May it please the court. It was awards day at Robb Elementary
He also is afraid of the mic.
to receive certificates of achievement. It's a day of celebration.
I have boosted the
After
sound.
the celebration, they returned to their homes and to their classes.
I want to get to where he's... Okay, here.
They hid in the dark and waited for help from the police. The teachers and the kids armed themselves with scissors to confront a gunman. To confront a gunman.
Okay, and I would just like to say shout out to court reporter who looks like me every single time something ridiculous happens in this court. I mean, okay, I'm going to have to take that off. But the caliber of her, what in the fuck is going on here face is just chef's kiss. Ma'am, I know I make that face a lot. This is why I'm not actually a lawyer, because I am physically allergic to the sound of stupid. And it shows on my face. And they don't have an EpiPen for that yet. So that's why I told my mom I couldn't be a lawyer.
Melody Forrest was also out there that day. She heard the shots fired. She had a concern for the kids. She was capable of action.
This is very theatrical. This is very emotion based. This is a very much, and most lawyers that I've noticed in opening statements are actually not good at this sort of narrative storytelling, this very kind of integration of not only timing but tonal quality and pauses. It's very Shatnery. It's very Calculon if you watch Futurama. But to me, it's very preachy. He reminds me of a lot of pastors. They're very good at this. They're very good at boiling things down and using emotion, using pauses, using their tonal quality. Now, he did and still continues to have the tonal quality of a bit of a quaver in his voice. I was legitimately wondering if he was crying, but that seems to be just his particular tonal quality. But it is aggravating to me. I don't like people that sound like they're going to cry. I want to help. But being kind of an awkward sort of autistic person, I never know if I should hug someone, if I should hug them, how long should I hug them, when does it become a hostage situation and I could be charged with entrapment. And I end up just awkwardly patting people. So if I awkwardly pat you, I'm trying to comfort you. I just suck at this humaning thing, okay? And only with consent. But that's where we kind of get from the state. And it was during this opening statement, which wasn't very long and wasn't very, very detailed. I was actually shocked that while it was kind of richly narrative and theatrical, it wasn't very big on detail, because we get into the defense's opening. And the defense opening has timelines. I'm trying to get these open because I did plan this, but, Now, we go over to the defense, and holy crap, we have a picture. And the defense actually did something very interesting. They actually kind of bifurcated their opening statement. And for those of you that are new to the way the Petty Express runs, Mo does not remember names. You can tell me that these lawyers have real names and I will forget them. I call this man Suspenders because he wears suspenders, which I think is a bold choice. I wouldn't, but at least I didn't call him Ginger. We have Rico Suave, who is going to come in because he has a really nice jawline. Look, I'm not saying, but that man has a jawline that could cut glass. Let me put facts and evidence, okay? Let me put facts and evidence. Look, there's not a lot to laugh about in this trial. I will be, making fun of lawyers. So here's Rico Suave.
And trying to have you focus on, because the monster's not here. And so the phrase that you...
And the defense was really, really good in this opening at pointing out that Adrian Gonzalez didn't do these crimes. The gruesome pictures that the jury's going to see wasn't Adrian's fault. He didn't pull that trigger. He was not responsible for those. And the state's case is very muddy. This, again, it goes to that very, very important distinction about how the defense sees the case and how the state sees the case. The defense sees the case as Adrian's responsibility from the moment that the gunman got onto the campus to the moment he got into rooms 111 and 112. The state sees basically everything that happened because Adrian didn't stop him when he went onto campus is Adrian's fault. I don't know if she's perpetually confused, the court reporter, or she's just got resting confused face, which I guess would be better than resting bitch face, except I would get resting bitch face if everyone assumed I was confused and kept trying to explain things to me. Howdy, howdy, Dolly Talk. So it was very interesting because the defense goes into timing.
You're going to hear about.
So to give you a very crude layout, this is the layout of the school. Now, these are the rooms 112 and 111 where, unfortunately, a lot of the children and the teachers lost their lives. So those are the two rooms. Now, this man represents where Adrian arrived on scene. He basically was called, he was actually at the high school. He was the high school resource officer. Robb Elementary did not have a resource officer. It was never in place. Typically, if they needed security, if they needed something like that, the operating procedure, since the high school was close to the elementary school, was whoever was over at the elementary school or over at the high school would come to the elementary school. Now, in our opening statement, we learn from the defense that it was not unusual around Robb Elementary to get a lot of lockdowns due to bailouts. Bailouts were simply where someone was running from the police, might have unclear documented or legal status, or was involved in crime of some nature. And instead of, staying with their car, they simply ditched the car and run away on foot. Well, the operating procedure at Robb was to go on a lockdown because you never know where those assailants might flee. They might go to the school. So that was the operating procedure. And we learned that this had become kind of a frequent thing around the school, that there were, I think, close to 50 bailouts near the school. Now, this isn't found out in the opening statement, but it does give you, and the opening statement does give you, how absolutely odd and kind of confusing you would find this as an officer. Because he was called over. We've had a wreck in front of the school. Let's check it out. And, he's going over there. And they'd never had a bailout result in someone actively going toward the school. So he thought he was going to a vehicle incident. Now, I do not like the police officer. I think that this was a cluster F of a cluster F. I am not, back the blue no matter who. I know that's vote blue no matter who, but basically, I judge the content of everyone's character. If you're an asshole cop, I'm going to call you an asshole cop. If you're one of the cops that were hanging out in the hallway getting hand sanitizer, go to Greenland, okay? Send you to Greenland or to space. We'll see what, for science. So I am not defending the officers here. But if you're going to tell me that a gentleman, the one gentleman who arrived first, is uniquely responsible for this, when you're going to see that 3 officers, I'm going to let him explain the timeline because I think that it was incredibly smart for the defense to clarify the timeline, to make things simpler. Again, kind of a tale of two cases. The defense has wanted to be very tailored, to be very specific about this time period, for the state to clearly prove that Adrian could have stopped something, that Adrian was in a position. Now, the state seems to be scattershot. We are going to give the jury a billion pieces of information. We are not going to simplify anything, and we are going to leave it to them to piece together. And I don't know if that's a strategy or not. It clearly is a state strategy to bring on the most emotional and the most heart-wrenching testimony. And that was very evident on the first day.
So this is just we're going to go over this briefly, okay? So this is what we're talking about. Not the scale, obviously. School. You're going to hear about. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah.
Give me 1 second, guys.
He did. That's what the timeline is going to illustrate.
You're
Court
gonna
always
hear it
has
at
technical
11:28. At
difficulties.
some point, we don't know for sure, but maybe around 11:20, this monster shoots his own grandma. And so
Well,
this
that's what
monster
he's going to
gets in
get
a car
into.
and he thinks he's running away from a murder of his grandma. And so he's coming down, and you will hear that he tells people online, I'm going to shoot up the school. There's times in there, and that's why we don't know exactly when he shoots his grandma, because he did that before and after. Not to law enforcement, not to 911, to online people. But 11:28:23, he wrecks in that culvert. He doesn't manipulate.
Okay, I'm also not going to take credit for these graphics, but if Mo did a PowerPoint animation, it would definitely look like this. That's how the car would move.
The corner properly, and he crashes. You're going to hear Gilbert Limones, as Bill said, call 911. You're going to hear the 911 video from Gilbert, and it's going to be emotional. Because Gilbert's walking out there, you can hear it, saying there's an accident. He's walking out there, oh God, he's shooting at me. Because as they were going to the culvert to help, this monster is shooting up at them from the culvert. He runs back. He lets the dispatch know he's walking to the school. He's walking to the school, and you will hear Gilbert, and I assume he's going to testify and say, in the name of Jesus, Lord, please protect those children. Oh God, please protect those children. Please hurry. Yes, sir, we're on their way. But I want you to focus on.
And this is why I will be doing these updates at the end of the week, but I also try to do breakdowns. I didn't do one Friday because, honest to goodness, guys, all it was going to be was curse the state. And as much as I'd love to do just a rolling tapestry of profanity, I do want to give you cogent information. So I feel like I'm settled enough that I can approach it much less profanely, but there will be some curse words because I have no respect for the state after Friday.
How was that dispatch? Incident involving a gun, not shooting at a school. Again, bailouts. Jason talked to you about what you're going to hear about bailouts and how many they have. This community deals with those type of bailouts. And so he deals with that. Between 11:30 roughly, 05, and 11:31:34.
Yes, this is the defense. We're going through opening statements, but this is where we have a very clear timeline of the small amount of time between when the car accident happened and the assailant made his way toward the school and when Adrian Gonzalez arrived. So I pulled this out because we are not going to get, a really clear kind of idea of what the state's doing. So this is the clearest kind of timeline that we've gotten thus far in the trial from either side.
He's going to walk very deliberately, as Bill said, towards the school. At some point, he starts shooting at the school.
Now, here is the thing that the defense is trying to get you to notice. At the point that Adrian Gonzalez is driving toward the back of the school, kind of around the parking lot, around this area, so where my pointer is, the assailant was right about here between the two cars. Now, Adrian Gonzalez was driving toward an adult woman he saw laying on the ground because he heard shots fired, and he assumed that she had either been someone injured by a bullet or was possibly the assailant. So he drove at a high speed toward that person on the ground. At the time that he was doing that, it is alleged by the defense and other, witnesses that the suspect, the gunman, was somewhere in this parking lot in between cars. And the first witness is going to say, yeah, he looked like he was hiding between cars. He was trying to avoid detection.
School from the parking lot. You will also hear not just Gilbert, the funeral owner, say that she saw him hiding between cars. It's important. So at some point, Adrian realizes it, because it's very unclear on the dispatch, you'll hear him yourself, that there's a gun involved. Not towards children, there's just a gun involved, walking towards the school. So Adrian knows in his mind instantaneously that this is not just a crash, it's not a 1050, something with the school. And so he's driving, and at 11:31:41, here's Melody. and she's helped. Bill's point, she's yelling at kids to stay in the building. Okay, so she's out here.
Now, I want you to notice that if you're over here in this area, now I'm not a physicist, okay, because that involves math, but you have some obstructions like a big industrial AC unit, depending on, and he was crouched on the ground, which is going to further impede his view. Again, I was willing to listen to the state if they could prove that this man was uniquely responsible, but they just seem to be trying to win re-election on the backs of these children while saying that they care about these children.
You're going to see Adrian drive all the way into the complex and drive back here. It's important. This is the east side of the building. This is going to be considered the west side, and you will see the south side, and this is the west side, excuse me. He makes contact with Melody. Now, there's some other times that are...
I do not believe that he went in sirens and lights on. Again, because he was called over, dispatched as just it being a motor vehicle accident. As he was driving over there, as he was getting, nearer the school and getting ready to go into one of the entrances, he heard something from dispatch about shots being fired.
Important. This is at 11:31:55, roughly. Okay, times are going to matter on this because they're trying to hold Adrian accountable for what he did or didn't do and what he knew and didn't know, and that's important. So at 11:31:55, he's parked and he gets out of his vehicle and makes contact with Melody. Now, at 11:32:09, it's not on here, but 11:32:09, he dispatches and he says, shots fired, shots fired. So now he's taking cover. What's important though is here is that 11:32:23, Officer Mendoza shows up at the corner on the west side of the building. Pay attention to these times. He's already...
And if you are new to this trial, the west side of the building is where the suspect, the gunman, was able to gain entrance. It was unlocked. That door had, I believe that door had a maintenance issue. But it seems like it was the school wasn't as secure as it was supposed to be. And we'll get into that with some of the witnesses. But suffice it to say, had that door been fully functional and actually locked, we wouldn't be having this trial, or we might be having this trial. It started last week. I believe it started on Tuesday. I don't know. We were still at the start of this week in that nebulous, like Christmas through New Year, what day is it time? But I do believe this started on Tuesday.
Shooting. He's shooting at the side of the building. He shows up. He says shots fired. No one is going to testify that Adrian could see anything. And you'll see some pictures. Look, he's way over here. Way over here in his car. You'll see the picture. And then the shooter, that monster, is walking up, taking shots. But he has no line of sight. Line of sight is important in this trial. 11:32:29, Officer Saucedo shows up on the west side of the building. Remember where Adrian's at? He's with Melody on the south side, but way where he can see the east side. 11:32, Sergeant Coronado shows up. Remember when Bill said his boss? His boss showed up a lot sooner than one running over here. There at this point, you will hear that Officer Mendoza believed he was under fire. Now, this is important because you're going to hear about echoes and vibrations and when people are shooting near buildings and how it sounds.
And this is a very good thing to keep in mind because you have multiple different people, again, saying there were shots fired here, here, and here. So it is incumbent on the defense to explain just how chaotic this actually was. This isn't like the movies where, Bruce Willis hears a shot or Jason Statham and he's like, sniper at 3:00. No, the sounds, this was already chaotic. And while I don't recommend listening to the 911 calls, in the background, if you're paying attention, it was chaotic there too. No one had any idea what to be doing. It was incredibly chaotic. You can hear people shouting at each other in the background of some of these 911 calls. Where is this? Where are the school officers? What's going on? So it is incredibly clear that this was a small police station or small police force that was in no way prepared for a situation like this. From dispatch to the, school district police officers to the regular police officers, no one was prepared or ready for this.
Nobody thinks she's being shot at. All I can tell you is, do we believe that she's being sincere? We do. I mean, she has no reason to lie about that. What you're going to find interesting, I think, and we think it's interesting, but is that she comes in to talk to law enforcement 7 days later. They don't go to her. She's not interviewed the next day. 7 days after this incident, she comes in and says, I have something to say. She's listened to the media.
So that's kind of, I just wanted to go into that because this is more me just talking at you with my notes, but I wanted you to get a feel for this because it's very much a it's very much a case of two different trials. The state is going to make Adrian Gonzalez uniquely responsible for everything, whereas the defense is going to rightly point out that Adrian is being punished because he was the first one there, and he wasn't one of the officers in the hallway. He was actively, as those officers were standing in the hallway, helping children from these, I need to have it up here, from these rooms on this side over by the green hedge, or what they make look like a green hedge, from 106, 105, 104, 103, and 102. He was helping children escape out of those windows. So at no point has the state made any cogent argument that he is uniquely responsible, because go ahead and, no, I forgot. There was more of this.
Watched all reports, and she comes in, and I'm going to say this respectfully because we're not going to try to beat her up. We're just going to talk to her. She's wrong about almost everything. She describes Adrian as Officer Page, completely describes him differently. She says that the shooter, that monster, didn't have a rifle. For sure he had a handgun. She thought that he shot at her, and all we can say, and the government will have to admit to this, but there's no evidence going to show that there is any, you're going to hear something called defects. It's kind of damage from any type of gunfire. There's no evidence, objective evidence, that there was any shooting this way. No shells or rounds over here, no holes through the buildings. These are just metal buildings. So an AR-15 would have gone straight through that. No evidence.
Now, I do believe he's a little bit wrong about this. I think either this building or this building did have one single defect on its kind of a skinny side, so the side closest to where the freedom seeds were going off. But there is no way to determine whether that came from as he was walking forward, that kind of thing.
So she's wrong about a lot of things. And then she's also wrong and she tells the ranger of what door and how this animal got into the building. She's wrong about all that. Okay? And we think it's very sincere, by the way, but this is 7 days later. So now,
it really was at this point that I had wondered, because in the opening statement, this case has to be incredibly hard for the defense, because you know that the state is going to be coming at you with every awful witness. And I will say, as someone who has watched all of this trial thus far, the defense has been incredibly good at speaking to these witnesses, these victims, these survivors, however they wish to be labeled. They have been incredibly gentle, respectful, even when the witnesses get a little snarky with him, even when the witnesses, which I get it. We want someone to pay for this. This was such a magnitude of a loss of innocence, a stain on humanity, a loss of life, that we want something bigger. We want something more to come out of this. We want punishment, but we're left with dumbasses and cowards. And how do you legislate dumbassery or cowardice?
These gentlemen are here. These officers are here. Mendoza, Saucedo, and Coronado. at these times. Now, these times are important. Okay, these times are very important. We talked about 3209, Adrian radio, shots fired. So Ramos is walking up this side of the building, and he gets into the school. And that's important. Because we're going to talk about it, and you're going to hear about agencies evaluating, different agencies, and I'll tell you about who they are in a second, evaluating this incident. And every one of them wonders why this school door is unlocked. This school door is unlocked. This school door is supposed to be locked.
And I do wonder, like I said, this case was incredibly heartbreaking, and I kind of reported on it and then didn't look at it. So I don't know if there are any civil suits holding the school district responsible, but there is plenty of blame to go around, and there are plenty of people that need to take accountability and ownership of the failures that allowed this to happen.
I get passionate because that school door should have been locked. And you're going to hear evidence that if there's anything that could have changed this incident, if that school door was locked, and it should have been. So he gets into the school at some point. This monster enters the school at 11:32:58. These gentlemen have been at this scene, these officers, long before that, on the west side, not the south side, with a long rifle, not a handgun, with cover because their car's there in a formation. So you're going to hear Saucedo shows up at the time he does, literally seconds after Mendoza. Mendoza thinks he's taking fire, but there's no evidence that Ramos shot that way. Zero evidence. They're not even going to try to assess that. Claim that. But still, Mendoza thinks, and he talks about, he describes it. He's getting behind the car, he's trying to get behind the engine block. Saucedo drives up and blocks him so he can cover his cover officer, which I understand that if it was really happening. Saucedo gets out with a rifle. Coronado shows up. Sarge, can I shoot? No response, turns back, and they acknowledge he went into the building.
So again, why aren't these officers more responsible? Why isn't the captain who didn't respond more responsible? And if you want to know the real outrage, this officer is charged with 29 counts of child neglect under a specific child neglect with an enhancement under the education code. The chief of police, the command person in charge of this cluster F, has 10 charges. So that's what we're looking at. This is exactly how ridiculous this case is. So we're going to get into the witnesses and the state, because after all of this, I was really quite certain that this was going to go down the route of the Scott Peterson, not that Scott Peterson, the one from Parkland, the resource officer or deputy that was held uniquely responsible for not taking care of Nicholas Cruz. So our first witness is Gilbert Limones, and he is the funeral home director. The funeral home is directly across the street from the school, and he's the one that reports, hey, there's been a car accident, and he is actually a lay pastor. And, just being a good guy, he, wants to go out, render aid, be a good Samaritan. So himself and I think an assistant go out to try to help whoever is in this culvert. And they're walking over, and you hear him on the 911 because he's walking over and talking on 911. Well, the gunman comes out and he gives testimony about how, as he's walking over, he starts to get shot at. And then you hear in his 911 possibly some of the most heartbreaking cries for help. Like, he's going toward the school. He's walking toward the school. Get someone over here. He's got, he's throwing a bag over the fence. He's got a force multiplier. He's shooting, towards. Now, Gilbert, because it was happening so fast, did think that the gunman was shooting toward the kids that were on the park close to where Gonzalez would eventually come to park. He did think that they were being shot at, but he was yelling, please, someone get over here, please send cops. And the dispatcher, honestly, the dispatcher could have been waiting at the DMV. We have people on the way. We understand. And you can hear the emotion and the terror in Gilbert's voice. Someone please help him. He's going into the school. He's going into the school. And this really did confirm my fears that the state is going for the emotional kill. This is not going to be, we are going to try this with the facts that we have. This is going to be ripping your soul out, and don't you feel bad, and someone needs to pay, and look, we have a person over here. You feel bad? He's guilty. Now, he does get into, again, just how really chaotic things were. The echo made everyone think that they were under fire. So regardless of where your placement was around the school, people legitimately thought that they were under fire, which I completely understand. Now, through him, we were able to get several different views from the funeral home. So we were able to see, not quite clearly in all views, but we were able to see the car crash, him walking over, getting shot at, and kind of all of that. And, get kind of timelines and things like that. And this was where I was really watching to see during the defense's first cross how they were going to handle these witnesses. And they really did a good job. They got him to really kind of narrow down the path that he saw the shooter take, how it was more straight on from the culvert rather than around to where Adrian was, because the state keeps making it seem like Adrian had a clean line of sight for 20 daggone minutes and did nothing. But it was really, really sad to hear the 911 call, and that kind of has set up the way the state is going to be using our emotions. Now, he was released from subpoena on both sides and could go on. The next witness was Jason Shea, and he was an LEO for 38 years. So the state seems to do this thing, or this seems to be their strategy. They have an emotional witness, and then they'll have a boring sort of foundational witness. So he was part of the DOJ DNA testing, kinship testing. So a lot of what the state is bringing in this week is ballistics information. We have just a cavalcade of state troopers that looked at different kind of bite-sized areas of this crime scene. Now, he was the one that kind of came up to us to explain what pew-pews are and what bullets are. And, when you use a pew-pew, the shell casing goes out, and it usually goes out and to the right. Now, this will be a topic that we come to ad nauseum, how a pew-pew works and where a shell casing goes. It's riveting testimony if you have some Adderall, I'm sure. Then we got introduced to the defense attorney, and I mislabeled him. He is in fact not Australian. He was a former UK Metropolitan Police officer. I'm guessing a special tactical police officer, because he does seem to be the one that's in charge of their ballistics talk. So now, look, y'all, as you can see when I put up my clips, I'm addicted to GB News, talk television. Like, if my news doesn't have a snooty UK person telling me about it, I'm not listening. But I have noticed this sort of verbal tick with sort of erudite and I don't know, because we don't really have like the middle class top class kind of thing, but there is a tendency, and I noticed in Keir Starmer and this lawyer, to go like, well, it's not actually a stutter, but it is just a repeating of words. And this lawyer is physically incapable of not doing a 3-page paragraph question. So it was basically hours upon hours of, this is how a pew pew works. Oh, this is where a pew pew shell could go. Do you see, is this called a casing? The state. Okay. So it was an interminable amount of just talk, and I can tell that because I take a lot of notes. Now, I do think that it's important to realize that the defense is also using these rangers to get in other little bits of information. Yeah. Sorry, I'm helping Mr. Mo find something for youngest most feral before they go to the lizard store or show. The defense has. Here's the problem with being overly wordy and overly talky like this UK lawyer is that when he does make good points, such as, you know, do regular police officer vests cover or stop long force multipliers? No, they're supposed to have plates. They won't stop smaller or larger caliber, weapons. And that's a lot of what he did. Now, this officer did help with interviews of school employees, the principal and the staff, the principal. And it's here where we start to learn about some of the failings of the school itself as far as security. The defense is able to get out on cross that the school had a history, or at least it came out in interviews, of giving magnets that would defeat the automatic locking doors to substitute teachers. That, doors could have been propped by rocks or opened up. That this particular west side door had been signaled in for maintenance, but it was much more of an ad hoc sort of verbal kind of, oh, this is broken, not writing up a work order. And then we did get that, there had been many bailouts. Now, the state kind of overlooks any failings of the school. Basically, the state's position is that Adrian should have run toward the fire. And it does kind of, again, if you don't know all the facts in the case, it's really infuriating because the minute you see Adrian, you think of those officers in the hallways putting on good night nurse hand sanitizer as children are losing their lives. There is a visceral anger that someone who decided to take a job in which the foundational object of your job is to run toward danger, and you're sitting there as children are begging and pleading for you to help them. So definitely a big thing. Now, our third witness for day one was Justin Duck. He was a Texas Ranger, and I believe he was one of the first Texas Rangers. Now, it seems like after the crime had finished, after this monster had finally been taken out, the Texas Rangers are going to be in charge of a lot of the investigation moving forward. So we are going to see basically every Texas Ranger except Walker Texas Ranger. So he was in charge of looking at the suspect's car. And this is where I realized that, yes, for sure, we are actually doing the trial that the state wanted to do against the gunman. Because for the case against Adrian, why do we need to look in the car? Why do we need to have pictures of this? So he goes through, and there were several things found in the car. There were magazines. It was a duffel bag was found near the car with another long range force multiplier, and I believe 6 to 8 clips or magazines. Now, we come to realize that the Texas Rangers took 2 days to process this car, and into the evening, or from the evening into the morning of the day after, it rained. So this truck that had a window shot out flooded. So we're going to get another Texas Ranger to explain the car thing again. But it is very clear that all of these Texas Rangers were only given very specific things to look at. They were kind of either not fully aware of the situation when they were doing the, tasks that they were doing, just collecting evidence. They didn't seem to be fully aware of all of the information about what had happened. And you're going to notice this a lot. The Texas Rangers and the specific officers that were doing the investigation are really going to only know about their particular part. And it does lead you to wonder who was in charge of these people, who decided to let a car sit out open air in the rain overnight, unsecure. And you kind of get the, sinking suspicion that this investigation was FUBAR too. Now, this witness was held for recall by the defense. So we might be seeing this particular witness again. Now, our fourth witness, she was our little state surprise. And I say this, her name was Stephanie Hill. She was one of the teachers. And let me just say off the bat, every single teacher in that school is a victim of this, that was in that school that day, was a victim of this event. And it strikes me as wrong, the state using the trauma. You could tell very viscerally that she did not want to be talking about this. You could tell in the way that she's changed her career. She's working in a different field altogether. And something to note about this trial, I do believe for the victims, the eyewitnesses, they do have an option as to whether to show their faces or just get a torso shot, which allow me to demonstrate, because I don't feel like this is any more dignified. Let me, to just see my chest. But that's what we're doing, and I guess they're okay with having their torso shown. And my hat goes off to, actually, my head's getting a bit warm, so my hat goes off to these teachers who, and we're going to go over her testimony because there are parts that I think are just absolutely badass about her. So she went around talking about her day. And for those of you who are unaware, I may not go through this every time, or I'll probably go through this every time for the teachers. But that particular day, I do have it, but here's the thing. I don't like turtlenecks. Anything around my neck makes me feel like I'm choking. It is cute though, not gonna lie. But I feel like I'm choking. Also, I feel like I'm a very tired Playboy bunny. Like I'm like the Walmart, yeah, it just, like I said, it's a cute thing. It just like, ugh. I'm not a fan of things around my neck. Fun fact. Now, she was a third grade teacher on May 24th, 2022. And she was kind of explaining that it was kind of classic, school policy that on awards days, after you have all the awards ceremony, that it was, kind of standard that some parents, you could basically take your kid home. And that will be something to pay attention about. But basically, she kind of said, okay, yeah, we did the awards. And then the rest of the day was going to be a bit of a fun day. We're going to watch movies, go to the recess, that kind of thing. And she talks about, because she only had, I think, 12 kids left after the award ceremony. So, kind of took them to their specials class in the library and went to go look at some little math trinkets to help kids learn math. Also, could we have had those when I was little? I mean, look, I'm not going to lie to anyone and tell you that math manipulatives would have made me understand calculus, but maybe it would have made learning math multiplication not as terrible. But she did talk about that. She talked about then going to take her kids out to the playground. And she recalled when she got her kids out to the playground, she heard this big metallic sound, a big bang. She compared it to, like, when the dump truck comes up for the big old dumpsters and they kind of whack it, and it flops, to open to get all the corroded, like, stuck on trash on the bottom out. Ugh. That's what she kind of compared it to. And then she said that she kind of heard fireworks. Now, she said that there was a break between, like, the big boom. And she kind of characterized that as about 5 minutes, but a relatively short time. And then she started hearing fireworks. And she said that the dumpster sound wasn't, completely out of the normal, but it was later in the morning. Usually if the dump truck's going to come, it's going to be earlier in the day. So, it didn't really pique her suspicion. But when she heard the fireworks, she looked at another teacher. Well, one of the coaches, and I think PE teachers, had a radio. When he heard the sound, he was like, gunshots, and get the kids inside. So her children and the other teachers had their children run in toward the closest building, and her kiddos hid in another teacher's classroom. And she went on to talk about this incredibly, harrowing thing that they could hear the shots. They didn't know what was happening, that the school district's training was locked down, lights off, hide. So, she had all the kids. They were trying to stay out of view of the door and the windows. And, even the kids at this point, even with the firecracker sounds, kind of thought it was just going to be another bailout. They kind of had been ubiquitous, and they figured it was all a joke. It wasn't until they heard more and more and more shots that they realized this was, in fact, a real situation. And you're going to hear from the teacher herself. The school had implemented this sort of like alert bot that would alert teachers through their cell phones if any sort of security issue had happened. Well, she didn't get the security warning from the school or the school intelligence Raptor program until she was already inside the classroom. So had they waited for the official school alert to go on lockdown, her kids would have still been outside on the playground. So again, there is a lot of blame to go around. And we hear about how the teachers got together and they all prepared themselves with scissors. This is the teacher with the scissor story. And, the teachers, how she would crawl over to the students who are getting obviously and understandably terrified, helping them with their breathing, helping them, try to be quiet and just relax and, hold tight. So it was incredibly moving, incredibly hard to listen to, because, and absolutely, just my heart goes out to her. Thank you, ma'am, for taking those moments where you were terrified and comforting those children and thinking about the safety of those children, knowing you were completely, David versus Goliath, but you picked up those scissors. So while this, not particularly so much in her first round of testimony, but definitely toward the end of her whole saga, she does get pretty snarky, not gonna lie. But you could tell she didn't want to talk about this. This is not a memory that she wanted to relive. And she didn't have to if the state had actually just made a tailored case. Now, the defense, I will say, was incredibly gentle with her, but this is where we learn that the state got her to admit during direct that she had seen the gunman when she was at the playground. She described his clothing and said that there were puff marks going in the field and ahead of her or in front of her, where it might have indicated that there were bullets being shot at them. Now, no forensic information has actually come out about that. And the judge was incredibly kind because, long story short, her testimony is going to get stricken entirely. There's a little bit of a rigmarole through, but he was incredibly kind. I really like this judge. The first day, even before opening statements, he, talked directly to the audience and said, I understand you're grieving. I understand this is incredibly emotional, but we can't have outbursts, things like that. He, kind of laid down the law in a very caring way. And I don't think that this witness is particularly trying to be dishonest. There's a lot of information about how poorly the brain records memories just because of biological factors during high stress situations. So I don't think that she's purposely trying to be evasive or anything like that. I truly believe that eyewitness testimony during really high stress things is not a good, it's just not a good reliable source, because our brain cannot encode memories correctly in a heightened state of stress. The neurotransmitters that are used to encode memories are being hijacked to make sure you live. Our keto anxiety, electric machine up here that runs our meat suit kind of likes to live. So on, running away and getting the hell out and making sure you take a crystal clear memory, your brain's like, let's GTFO. But it was incredibly moving testimony, but the defense was not made aware that between the grand jury and this statement, her testimony had changed, because in her original statement to the Texas Rangers that was taken 4 days after the incident, she didn't mention any puffs of smoke. She didn't mention seeing the Pew Pew men, and she didn't mention seeing him near the south side. Now, defense raises their hands and says, this was never turned over to us. This is a change in her testimony that we were unaware of. And the state tries to pull it off by saying, now, this is where we're introduced to Lady of No Comb. Now, lady lawyers, look. If you know that your trial is going to be live streamed, I'm going to need you to think about the back of your hair. Now, I get it. You can't see the back of your hair, nor does your stylist like you, because those highlights are chunky, straight out of 1991. You got a frosting cap and you did it your own self. So I would talk to my hairstylist, ma'am, because whoever did your highlights hates you. And if you did them yourself, ma'am, come to me. I will cap your hair. I can do it better. Holy God. Anywho, brush, back of hair. All I'm going to say. Now, apparently she Ally McBealed too close to the sun, because she was like, I think we're getting nitpicky about what we turned over because I was running a full legal office while preparing for this case. Come to find out, in the interview that the state generally has with its witnesses before the trial, she came up with this brand new information that she saw the gunman. Now, the lady lawyer had not looked at her Texas Ranger testimony and therefore was unaware that her testimony from, her initial response to the incident and her grand jury testimony had changed. She was unaware of that because she was real busy and it was the holidays. Again, this is the kind of crass ridiculousness. It is very imperative on you, if you're going to take the moral high ground, that you are the only one fighting for justice for these children, that you alone in Texas, in Tejas, are, the one that cares for these children. If you're going to kind of try the case from this moral mini high horse, then maybe fucking look at your paperwork before you interview someone. Because that's the problem you run into with someone like me when you want to throw around that you're, the only person protecting these children or getting justice for them. You would think you wouldn't do a half-assed job. You think you would be dotting every I, crossing every T. Well, the defense raises up their hand and they're like, this could be a Brady violation. Now, the judge is not impressed at all and decides to, after hemming and hawing and actually putting the state's attorney up to testify under oath, decides to send the jury home for the day. All of the lawyers are going to come in the next day and see what can be done to fix this. And they did. Now, I found it really interesting. So the day 2 was just with the lawyers and, outside the presence of the jury, the judge listened to this and basically decided, after a lot of talk, after a lot of hemming and hawing, that the state had, in fact, not turned over information to the defense. And in order to cure. So that's right, Alice G. A Brady violation is exculpatory evidence or evidence that's more on the side of proving you innocent that wasn't turned over. The state is obliged to turn over all its evidence of its case. That's called discovery. Now, it's very unethical and against the rules of court for the state to see, like, oh, well, I have a receipt that says Cletus was in the Wawa getting a, something or other, instead of here, punching a hooker. If the state decided to not turn over that Wawa receipt and the defense were able to find out that it exists, the state had it, and they didn't turn it over, there's a potentiality for a mistrial. Now, there are 2 different versions of mistrials, with prejudice and without. Now, without prejudice basically means that we're starting all over again. You lose this jury. We will go back to the beginning, pick a new jury, and restart this trial. There is nothing we can do to fix it. Now, a mistrial with prejudice means that you can never bring charges against this person again. Now, the defense did ask for a mistrial at this point when they learned that the state hadn't turned this over. Now, this timing and location is very important, and the defense actually went into chambers with the judge and kind of gave them a verbal outline of why this was so incredibly detrimental to their case, that they were not aware that this person, this witness, was going to place the gunman in the southern area of the school, because they did have a defense against Melanie Flores, who was going to say that she saw, the pew-pewer, he shot at her. They already had a strategy for that. But, out of the blue, learning that another witness was going to claim that the gunman was over there was very detrimental. So after a lot of hemming and hawing, the judge basically gave the defense sort of everything they wanted. But he did deny the mistrial. The defense was able to cross-examine the witness. Where we had left things off, she was getting ready to go to the defense. The defense was able to play the recording of this witness talking to the Texas Rangers, in which the Texas Rangers asked her at least 2 times that I made notes of, is there anything else you want to tell us? Because her testimony was basically the same, except there was, again, she never claimed 4 days after that she saw the shooter, where he was and what he was wearing. Didn't claim that. And the Texas Rangers gave her multiple chances. Is there anything else? Is there anything you maybe can remember right now? If you remember anything else, give us a call. And she didn't do that. So basically, the defense was able to play the Texas Ranger interview in its full, cross the witness. The state would then get to redirect. And then at the end of that, if the defense still wasn't, well, yes, they did remove her. If the defense still wasn't happy with it, the judge was just going to strike it. And he basically told about Morton's Law in Texas. Basically, if the state has any statements that conflict with the state's narrative, it must be turned over to the defense and give specific remedies. Now, I fundamentally disagree with the judge. He was kind of under the impression that this particular teacher witness was not that impactful on the jury. I very much disagree. I thought her testimony was incredibly moving. But at the end of day 2, we were basically just told, okay, we're going forward. We'll let you bring in this interview. We'll let you thoroughly examine her, and then we'll go from there. So the cross was, pretty tough questions. You could tell that she was not happy that however gently they were trying to ask her questions and, possibly gently approach her, that her testimony had changed, and kind of pointing out that, I know you said it's not your job to investigate. It's not, you don't know what the detectives need to know. But wouldn't you have told them very soon after if you had seen the gunman? And he did get her to admit that. I think that the defense was very, very strategic in the way that they offered another scenario for the witness to take. That loud metallic bang she heard might have been the car wreck and the subsequent firing toward the school. And all in all, I think the defense did a very good job because, again, it has to be incredibly surgical and very gentle witness. And you could tell this witness did not like being questioned on her memory. And I wouldn't either. So again, I deal with, my pain through levels of bitchiness. I completely understand her. But she did come off very flippant about things toward the end of her testimony. And I can get it, but I do think that the defense was very, very compassionate in the way that they offered an alternate sort of very logical alternate scenario about what she might have heard. And I think they were very clear that, they didn't think that she was, lying or maliciously trying to change her testimony, that, acknowledging that the brain does really weird things when they are in, stressful situations. So there was a lot of back and forth. I think we went up to like 4 or 5 redirects. All of that only for the judge to send the jury out, listen to the arguments from both sides, and ultimately deciding to strike her entire testimony. But in a very, very, I think, gentlemanly and compassionate move, Before he brought the jury back, he had the witness come back and explain to her that it was not her fault that her testimony was being thrown out, that no one is accusing her of trying to manipulate the situation at all. This is in no way a reflection of what she said. It's just, and he gave kind of a personal story of being in a car wreck and how even his memory is fuzzy of that. And he remembers it differently every time he tries to go back there. So he didn't have to do that. And I thought that was just very kind and a classy move. But eventually, and in the end, all of her testimony was thrown out. Then we get to our next witness, Amelia Franco, and she was a very memorable witness because she was another witness that we only saw her torso. But you could tell she was greatly affected by this. She was the after school kind of care coordinator. She had been there during the day. While she didn't have any students with her, she was getting stuff ready for an after school dance program, I guess the kids were having. So she was in her kind of room, getting things ready and coordinating with the coach to bring supplies back. So the school was kind of secured on the perimeter by two gates that basically people couldn't get into the parking lots in the back. So she propped her door, got out, and, was standing next to the gate as she's waiting for the coach to come back with a bunch of party supplies. And she then hears the wreck. And she tries to go over there to, assess the damage on the person when she realizes, oh my goodness, he's shooting. And she runs back toward her room to try to alert the front office that we have a gunman coming toward the front. Now, it takes her several times, and I don't think she's ever able to get to the front office, but she is able to get back into her classroom. And, she's trying to call 911, trying to get in. She sees him shooting. She's then in her room by herself. And she does kind of speak about, the scenario she thought, do I attack him? Do I jump on him? Things like that. It was very harrowing. You could tell that this was incredibly, incredibly stressful, that she is the type of woman that wanted to run to help. And towards the end, it became very evident at this point that the state wants the trauma. They kept poking things, and you just felt incredibly sorry for this woman. She was shaking. She was obviously reliving these moments, this terror, the loss that her school had. I mean, this woman was a longtime employee of the school district. I'm sure she knew these students. They came to, after school. She probably knew their siblings, their parents. This isn't a huge town. So you can tell that this is, just weighed on her soul, weighed on her heart. And it was very interesting because defense attorney Rico Suave comes up and he starts asking her very logical, very matter-of-fact questions. And within a minute or two, at the most 10 minutes, she's not shaking anymore. He's very gently asking her questions. I will say this defense has been very good at crossing these witnesses that are having to relive this terror, this horror, and not taking the bait when they get irritated with him, when they ask him to repeat things, giving them breaks. Now there is a little commentary, positive. They make very sure to respect and honor what every single teacher did that day. And I think that's good, but strictly speaking, those kind of asides probably wouldn't be allowed in a trial. It'd be the same thing as some of Yannetti's, side comments and kind of Jackson's sarcasm. Strictly speaking, do I think that, you know, they do a little bit more schmoozing than they normally would? Yes, but do I understand why they're doing it and why the judge isn't saying anything? Absolutely. So it was just very, very noticeable exactly where the state is going with this. Then we got through all of that. She was fully released. The next witness was Mr. Hill. He was a resident. He was a really, really short witness. He did live across the street from Uvalde, next to the funeral home, and he took a video with his camera of the suspect entering the building. And I was kind of surprised that we were able to see it. Knowing what you know, it's so incredibly cold. Because if you were just to see it randomly, and you weren't paying attention, it just looks like someone quickly entering a building. But we know what happens because this person entered the building. So he was fairly quick. Then we had Agent Hyung Wen, and he was in charge of doing a lot of the exterior ballistics searches. So he and his state troopers were doing line searches in the exterior of the large scene, and they were marking shell casings. And then we had 15,000 million hours of shell casings where they landed, where things got picked up. And again, the defense was able to bring in some, kind of information, what's the difference between cover and concealment? If you're an officer, what can you do with cover and what can you do with concealment? Cover means you're visually blocked, but concealment means that you're behind something that will stop bullets. And kind of going through what the difference with that is. And again, this is where you notice that the investigation is very, very segmented. But we go through like a bajillion and 12 years of this. So the state does have a strategy, which is either to bore you to tears or suck your humanity out of your soul. The next witness we got was Lynn Denning. She was a teacher in room 104. So she is in the building where rooms 111 and 112 and a lot of the carnage was. She went through kind of the training, where she was, what she was doing with her fourth graders. And I believe that this was the teacher that had a lot of their students want to stay in their class, because as I told you earlier, this day was an awards day and parents were free to pick up their kiddos after they left. But I believe this is the teacher that had a bunch of really cool craft ideas, ready to go, and all the kids wanted to stay with her. So she, starts to hear some fireworks and gets everyone into lockdown, gets her kids into lockdown. And as she's getting everyone into lockdown, her window explodes and she doesn't realize, and I don't know if it was clarified or not, but she was either injured with shrapnel or she got a graze wound. So she is over here. This hero teacher, despite being injured, is trying to calm her children down. She gets all of her children down. She's keeping them calm. She locks their doors, turns off the light, does everything she can to keep the kids, quiet, comfortable. She hears more shooting. There's debris falling down. There is evidence that this is not a drill. And this teacher, despite being injured herself, is more worried about her children, keeping everyone safe, and worried about the way the school is constructed. They're kind of like Jack and Jill rooms. So 104, I think, connected to 102 or 103. So you would have kind of a little Jack and Jill door where you could go in between the rooms. And unfortunately, when the shooter barricaded himself into a room, he effectively got two rooms for one, 111 and 112, because of that adjoining door. Now, she goes on to explain that eventually, and not to her knowledge at the time, but at the point, I guess, where everyone was twiddling their thumbs in the hallway, Adrian Garcia and other officers were breaking out the panes of glass that lined the windows of these particular rooms and evacuating children out of the windows. So again, explain to me why Adrian Gonzalez is on trial when he was actually helping children at this point, and doing something functional as those assholes stood in the hallway. Now, we did get through this witness that, yes, she did know that the west side door was needed maintenance, wasn't fully able to lock. She was aware. Now, all the teachers and all of the district employees have been very, very careful to say that any magnet used to defeat the door locks was those magnets that were supplied to them were not supplied by the district. Which makes me incredibly uncomfortable if this is a district-wide policy, because I don't know if anything has changed. Is this something that continues to go on even after the tragedy? But basically, the defense did a wonderful job of only really talking to her about kind of those standard operating procedures. Again, getting her to admit that there had been a lot of bailouts, a lot of kind of false alarms with these lockdowns, and let the teacher know that Adrian was one of the officers that was responsible for getting her and her students out of there. Now, this particular teacher, is a hero. I believe she has been able to stick with the kids who went through this. She is teaching another grade, but I believe that she moved over with the kids that went through this with her, and she's teaching them now. But just an incredible teacher, and you could tell by the way that no kid wanted to go home from her class. We get into another teacher, Nicole Ogburn. She was a teacher in 102, so she was adjacent to the 104. And her testimony is very similar. She goes through, kind of they were doing their thing, what happened when the lockdown happened, how she, comforted her students, what they did, where they hid, kind of giving a general overview of her room, what the school district training was, things like that. And then she was the one that admitted that the custodian kind of interactions with the custodians to sort of let them know that that west side door needed maintenance were more informal. It would be rare that they would actually write up kind of a work report or a workup order. They would, kind of just pass them and, hey, Joe, this door isn't working. This particular teacher is a special ed teacher, and she talked about how she has this kind of curtain in her room, and she and her students all kind of hid behind this curtain and waited until they could get out, and how she and another teacher had to move a big bookcase because they had a bookcase in front of a window, but they were able to get out. And it was just all incredibly harrowing testimony. And again, this teacher, just like the teachers before her thoughts were of her students, of getting them safe, of keeping them comforted when their parents couldn't be there, of protecting them. She made sure her body wasn't the first one facing the door. She had all the kids behind her. And as a mom, to know that there are people like that watching my kids, willing to put themselves in front of them, I mean, that's amazing. Of all the people that failed this day, those teachers didn't. Those teachers probably saved lives by keeping those kids as comfortable and as comforted as possible so they could be quiet and stay quiet. And then we had another teacher, Nicole Hood, and again, she was kind of in that Jack and Jill room from the other teacher with the curtain. And she went on to talk about how, you know, she was unaware that that west door had been unlocked. She had been under the impression when the incident was happening that the shooter gained entrance on the southern door. She wasn't quite aware of all of the, you know, procedures and things like that as far as, and again, I don't know if the school district has gotten to these teachers, but everyone's been very vague about where teachers were getting magnets to give subs to kind of defeat these safety doors that would automatically lock. They have been very careful to say that it wasn't from the school district. So I wonder if, you know, I wonder if the school district is covering its ass. And I'm pretty sure they are. The next person we get is Kevin Wright. He's a Texas Ranger. And this is the one that, again, was 900 years, but he was basically going through all of the classrooms in that building except for 111 and 112. So all of the front-facing classrooms that had been shot through the windows. And after 837 years of pictures and explaining trajectories and, you know, whether the bullet path was from outside the building to inside the building, it was just a long, long testimony. I think I have 15 pages just because if I don't write notes, I will start daydreaming, I won't pay attention, and the trial will turn into Charlie Brown. So it's good for me to just take, you know, just take a lot of notes. Now, we went through 900 years with him. I am not sure that the state made any points with this other than to, again, show just how vulnerable these children were and how much damage the monster who actually did this shooting actually did. We get to our next witness, but before we get our next witness in, the judge makes clear that we might be in for some gruesome photographs with this next witness, which made me believe that we were potentially looking at the medical examiner next, but no, the next witness was Juan Torres, and he is going to be walking us through the bullets and the defects in room 111. So in this room, he took these pictures directly after all the children had been removed. I believe at the beginning, the suspect was still in the room. But basically, he was going to be taking pictures. There was going to be blood. There was going to be evidence of carnage in these rooms. And the judge did let people know, you know, we will have no outburst. If you need to leave, please leave, but we will maintain composure. Now, we didn't see a lot of the photos. They were not up. And even some of the testimony was off audio. And I do believe that was the testimony. We found out through this witness that in room 111, these rooms were constructed as such that there was sort of a wall-long desk along one wall of the classroom, and the children had been trained to crawl under the desk and hide under there. It seems that is where the shooter targeted a lot of these children. So even that testimony was closed audio. We couldn't hear it, and I'm okay with that. It went on for a long time, and since we didn't really see it, I couldn't really hear how everything was being taken in. Now, we then went to lunch, and then defense started on cross. Now, we get off where Turner left off, and the state had actually talked about this sort of hellfire trigger system that's, I guess, supposed to be somewhat like a bump stock, or it basically just means you're able to pull the trigger faster. It's some kind of workaround so you can make freedom seeds go faster and shoot more stuff. Now, it, again, all this seems to do is, make bullets come out faster in a shorter time. And the defense did bring in that they didn't use a 3D laser to collect evidence. They, took pictures, but more high-tech, solutions weren't used. There can be laser pointers instead of the trajectory rods. They got this witness to talk about the fatal funnel, kind of how the rooms were set up with a single entryway. And if we know the gunman had barricaded himself in there, that everyone going single file through that door, officers are trained to not stay in the fatal funnel. So we did get some good information out of this witness, but where we kind of went with it was kind of hard for me to assess, because a lot of it was, we didn't have a visual of what the jury was watching, thank goodness. But we also didn't have some of the audio. Now, this was around mid-afternoon Friday, and I was wondering if we were going to kind of end here with that being sort of the last really heart-wrenching testimony or, visual evidence that we would have to see. We then got to another Texas Ranger. He did, I believe, the outside, because the state's case is that Adrian Gonzalez had a line of sight and didn't take it. They have found one defect in one of the buildings a little bit south and in line where Adrian would have been. They found one defect that might prove that the gunman fired one shot toward the south. This became a lot of if you hold the pew-pew this way, where will the shells go? If you point the pew-pew this way, where will the shells go? If you point from the hip, where will the shells go? It was a lot of hypothetical stuff. And, it again made you question why is this investigation so piecemeal? Why wouldn't the state maybe present this through the lead detective? Again, I go back to the Darrell Brooks trial, where instead of getting every single officer up, the lead detective kind of went and said, okay, Officer blank wrote a report and saw this, this is where this officer is interacting. And the problem is that we are now getting to page 84 of my notes. And I know I take a lot of notes, and I've been watching trials a lot. I can imagine how overwhelmed and discombobulated the jury is, because we're not going kind of in a chronological order. We're not, we're giving them a lot of information overload. We're not explaining, well, what do these trajectories tell us? What do they mean? No, they're giving you 140 trajectories. Then we got to the medical examiner, and there was a brief sidebar. The defense has had a running objection to the fact that these autopsy photos are not only gratuitous, but they're more prejudicial than probative, that they are more being used to, pull in the heartstrings of the jury. Now, they did talk about Mr. Garcia, one of the teachers that passed away. He did have gunshot wounds. And during this time, the prosecutor brought up stippling and how to tell if something's a close contact wound, an intermediate wound, or undeterminate. And then we got into the children, and I didn't realize how much some of these children had been shot at. And I can understand now. I thought maybe one or two, but the first child, and I just named them child, had 12 gunshot wounds. And the next child had 12 as well. Child number 742 had 4 wounds. 743 had 8 wounds. 744 had 13 wounds. I stopped writing the pass. I couldn't. I really couldn't. Child 746 had 5 wounds. Child 747 had 3 wounds. Child 748 had 5 wounds. 749, 5 wounds. 750, 3 wounds. 751, 2 wounds. 752, 1 wound. 753, 2 wounds. 754, 2 wounds. And 755, 3 wounds. It was at this point that I lost all fucking respect for the state, because the prosecutor looks and said, "Oh, we have another person coming for the other children." And the medical examiner said, "No, I have more children." Again, this is where it gets really fucking hard to believe that you are the one fighting for justice for these children. When you sat here and you had these jurors look at these pictures. This was a high-powered rifle, 13 bullet wounds on a little baby's body. And then to not only do that, but the last 2 children that the state forgot, they didn't even announce their names until afterwards, which they did do. But the last child had a single wound, and so did child 22-1400. That was incredibly difficult testimony. And I thought the state was very, very, again, this is insidious. This is what they are leaving the jury with at the end of the week. And I thought that was bad enough. The defense didn't do much with cross, but did ask that all the autopsy reports, all of the information listed to include the photos, would remain sealed. It does seem that the judge had already done that. He had already sealed it, but they did want to make sure that this information was sealed. The judge gave everyone a 10-minute break, and I thought, okay, all right, we're going to, maybe we're going to end early. It's going to be, I'll go hang out with Nick. But then we had one of the mothers of the children who lost their lives come up. And the state got her to talk, and you could tell that this mother has just been destroyed. Because at the start of that day, she was just a normal mom of a couple kids, trying to get everyone through the end of the year, go to everyone's award ceremonies, get ready for summer break. You could tell that, she had gotten to see her daughter's award ceremony. They had pictures. And then she was called by a relative and said, "Hey, you need to come here. You need to come here. Something's happening at the school." And to follow along with the theme of no one had any idea what the hell they were doing, she was told to go to the school. Then she was told to go to the hospital. Then they were finally sent to the civic center. And you could hear this woman talk about how she waited and waited and waited. And I believe she was one of the last 2 of the students who had lost their lives' parents to be informed hours later. It wasn't until 9 or 10 that evening that she found out. And the part that got me was when the mom broke down and said, "I should have taken my child home from that award ceremony. I should have taken her with me." And I think every mom knows that 90% of motherhood is thinking you are doing this completely wrong, being guilty about not being a good enough mom. Am I giving each child attention? Am I doing a good job? Because most moms, we know how incredibly important the job we have to raise, good, kind, loving people. We understand the job we've been given, how incredibly important it is that we do a good job. That's why we're so damn hard on ourselves. And to bring this woman up, to use this woman's pain, was so incredibly manipulative, so incredibly crass to me, that I'm glad that Nick was doing his Tipsy Friday. Now, the defense just let this woman go and said, "I'm sorry the state brought you up here." And that's kind of my read on week one. You guys, I didn't believe that I would take 2 hours for this, but I take a lot of notes. So that's kind of a breakdown, not a short one, a long breakdown of week one. I think that we're going to be in for more of the same from the state. I hope that we continue to see grace and compassion from the defense. I think they've done a good job of being incredibly compassionate, incredibly skillful in their questions on these very, very heartbreaking witnesses. And a reminder, I will be doing breakdown videos. If there are days that you simply can't watch, I will be doing breakdowns like this where it's just me talking at you, breaking down my notes. But we are at the end of my notes now. Not yet. I did kind of take a break from everything yesterday, so I will have to look at that. Now, I do want to do a bit of, and let me get it here, because I want to put something in you guys' mind. But after Uvalde, there is a case, jury selection is starting tomorrow. The Paul Cañero case, and I'm going to have a video. I'm going to be working on a breakdown of a couple of articles. It's the Colt Neck Mansion Massacre. Now, if you don't know, this is a New Jersey case. It's a brother who is charged with taking the life of his younger brother, his wife, and their 2 children, and attempting to burn the mansion down because he was embezzling from their business. It's one that I've wanted to cover for a while, but we are covering Uvalde. So that will probably be our next trial on the Petty Express. I had done another standalone video with an article about that. It's fairly long. But definitely our next case is probably going to be the Paul Cañero case. So that's an interesting one. It's definitely an OG kind of true crime thing. It's kind of funny because you kind of get these sort of headlines and then forget how long the legal system takes. So I had already thought he'd gone to trial, but no, he hasn't. So that's definitely going to be our next trial, and look for that to start possibly Tuesday. So that will be that. And then this week coming up, I will be making standalone videos. The parents or the mother and stepfather in the Rebecca Park case in Michigan, the one where the daughter was pregnant and the parents cut the baby out for God knows whatever reason. They are expected to be standing for a hearing, kind of an evidentiary hearing to see if they can be charged with murder. Those are expected to go a couple of days. So I will keep my eyes on that. And we might be looking at that next weekend, since Uvalde does take it out of me. At the end of the day, by the time I finish up my breakdown little video and say goodbye to you, I am stick a fork in me done. So don't expect me to be like Baker and have all of it, like be up at 4. No, I already feel like a, spent baked potato at the end of the day just with Uvalde. But I do expect to maybe get more clarification this coming week of where the state is maybe going with this. And I do expect, do be prepared that the state might introduce first thing on Monday. And I don't know who they'll introduce this with, but there were 911 calls that came from the school, from the children. And I don't put it past the state to start Monday morning with those calls. So Nick and I will be covering this mornings with Nick at his channel, and then afternoons with me, because it's, like 8 billion o'clock in the afternoon in Sweden during the afternoon. So if Nick needs some sleep, to function, I take over in the afternoons. But if you want to hang out with us, you can definitely hang out with us and do that. And join me for Mornings with Mo. I am going to get off of here and start some reading, taking some notes, and trying to figure out a schedule for our book club for members. So I shall be doing stuff. I just won't be talking. And I did get these things that are supposed to be for singers to help with your throat. So I noticed, I'm like, Mr. Mo's like, you sound like you have a pack a day at the end. And I'm like, I do a lot of talking. And he's like, well, you're always quiet when I walk in. And I was like, well, I mean, I'm not like, talking all the time. But there you go. Thank you guys. I know this is a rough trial, so I do hope that we can keep this to 2 weeks. I don't know what the state is trying to do other than to bore us or rip our souls out, but I have never been less impressed with a state's case. I have never been as angry as I was Friday, just for that mom to have to. It just felt so incredibly invasive. Here's a woman who has walked through something that I can't imagine, and she has to take her self-recriminations and her pain and share it with us. I mean, it was so incredibly not needed. It was ridiculous. So maybe like the prosecutor, the state will watch a ton of Touched by an Angel, and the power of Della Reese will give them souls, and we'll have a better week. But even if we don't, Nick and I will be here to hang out with you and try to make, well, the unbearable tolerable. Thank you guys so much for joining, and please share if you know someone who's interested in this case but doesn't want to watch the gruesome, kind of like Simon from Casual Criminalist. I'm more CSI, not Saw, so I don't tend to go into everything. I could have written down all of the wound paths, but I just didn't want to. And at the end, I hope that the parents, the families, and the friends get all the love and support that from the community that they don't seem to be getting from the justice system or the government. Bye, you guys.